On my first day in heaven, I don't know what's going to happen because I'm just going to be there. My second day in heaven, I'm going to sing like that. Well, brothers and sisters, we come today to begin to celebrate Hinge Week in human history. You know what I mean by that, don't you? You know what a hinge looks like? It's got all of this before the hinge part. It's got all of this after the moving part. Everything before this week was prelude, and everything after this week is celebration. And so this week is Hinge Week, and we always want to take time to remind ourselves that this week is so special. And it's told in all of the Gospels. But before we begin to actually go into the Word, the title of today's message is Heart of Palm Sunday. Have you ever had heart of palm salad? Anybody had heart of palm salad? Well, heart of palm salad is not usually on the menu around here because we don't have so many palm trees. But over in the Middle East and in many of the southern climate cities, heart of palm salad is on the menu. And nutritionists tell us that heart of palm is the most delicious and nutritious of all the salads. But there's one hitch to that. The reason it's called heart of palm is because when you take it from the palm tree, the palm dies. And so you get one heart from one palm tree. Sometimes it's big enough to share with 2, 4, 6 people maybe. But the palm has to die in order for the nutritious, life-giving vitamins and minerals can come to us, into our body for that salad. And so this is a little picture of the heart of palm as it's served in many restaurants in the world. And I've had it on numerous occasions with my travels to the world. So we're going to talk about palm trees a little bit as we begin today. But first we want to sort of set the setting. For Heart of Palm Sunday, you'll notice we have a little timeline here that starts with Sunday, which was called the first day of the week, and then the days of the week go down to the final day of the week, the day of rest, that was the Sabbath for the Jews. And so we're going to start this week off, and we'll start on Sunday here, and we'll work through the highlight, the absolute thematic highlight of each day of the week as the Gospels tell us. And so if you have your Bibles, I'll refer you to Zechariah 9:9. Now, Zechariah is based on the almost the very last few pages of the Old Testament before Malachi. And so, Zechariah 9:9 says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be broken. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth." And so Who is Zechariah talking about here? He's talking, as he has in his entire letter, worked up to this point, talking about how justice will come and how salvation will come to the people who have been so discouraged in their exile from Israel. And he's talking about the Messiah. The Messiah would come not only on the donkey, but on the foal of a donkey. And so, what he's talking about is the old covenant being over and a new covenant begins. And so when you see this, you'll see the king is present. The old covenant is over, and so the king is present. Now, why do I have the donkey's head circled here? You'd think I'd have Jesus circled there, wouldn't you? Well, he is the center of what we're talking about today. But the reason that's there is because there was a history in the Old Testament days that you didn't come through the city as a victorious leader. Prior to Roman times, you did not do that on a horse because horses are skittish. And horses, when they get in a narrow area with people all around, the king could never take a chance on a horse being skittish and throwing him. Then he would look ridiculous laying on the ground in front of the people that are now proclaiming him as king as he's coming through. So they would always come through on a mule or a donkey. And yet, no one ever came on the foal of a donkey. So it was really precise that when the Messiah came, according to Zechariah, that he would come on the colt, the foal of a donkey. And that's what Jesus came into town with. And so when he did, all the people were saying in Aramaic, Hoshano, Hoshano, Hoshan, or Hoshayo means save. Usually it means save me, save me. And no means now. So Hoshano is where we get Hosanna in our English tongue. So whenever we say Hosanna, we're not just rejoicing over God, but we're asking God, save us now, as they did as he was coming through. Now you would think if Jesus is coming through in this scene that he's prepared by having a colt ready for him to come into the city with, that these people caught on. They knew that he was saying that by how he was coming into the city. You remember, Jesus has spent several years healing people and teaching wonderful things and changing people's hearts. And this was a great time for the people. They thought, hey, the Messiah is here. The Messiah is coming, and he's going to kick out the Romans, and he's going to do all of these wonderful things. He's going to heal all our people, and we're going to become the center of the universe again, like we've always thought we should be as God's chosen people. And so they knew about it. And so what about the palm fronds? What do the palm fronds really mean? They got the palm fronds here. In that day and age, when the king would come in slowly on a mule or a donkey so that he would make sure that he was conquering. You know, you don't need to come in on a flashy steed, on a big white horse, if you already own everything. You don't need to impress anybody. You just need to be steady. And that's why they would come in. David came in on a mule. And Solomon came in on a mule. And you think, gosh, didn't they have the money to get a horse? Sure they did, but they wouldn't do that because they already owned everything by the time they went through the city for the people to say, we recognize you as our king. And so the palm frond was saying basically, I'm glad my ruler is here. And Here's my vote to make your journey into the city less dusty. They'd put cloaks down, and then they'd put palm fronds down, and as the mule would come through, then he would kick up less dust, and as the other followers would come in, they would kick up less dust. And so that's why they would go and cut palm fronds and put them down for that in that dusty climate. And so the king was saying he's present, and the people were saying the king is present. Now, he comes through and he does things on that Monday that we won't cover today, but you can certainly read them in the Gospel of Matthew. On Monday, there is a highlight there too. And so let's turn to Matthew chapter 21, Matthew 21:13. Matthew 21:13 says this. We'll back up to 21:12. And Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. Well, so much for the easygoing, triumphal entry. Right? The very next day, after everybody thought he was going to come in and change everything, he comes in and he does start to change some things. But his first message as he comes in, that is a graphic message of action for the people, is to turn over the tables of the money changers. Why would he do that? I mean, bankers are nice people too, right? What they were doing was they had set up all their money changing and all of their buying and selling of sacrificial animals and brought it into the court of the Gentiles. So no Gentile could crowd in there and hear anything that was going on in the temple because of all the racket of money changing. Not only were they changing money, but if you did not get your money changed before you got there, there was an extra 15% charged on the exchange of money when you got to the temple courts. And so that's why Jesus called it a den of robbers, because they were actually charging 15% to exchange in the court of the Gentiles. And Jesus said, this was all set up by me and the Father to have double the space for Gentiles to come and in the quiet to hear what's going on in the court of Israel, to hear God being extolled. And you've made it into a cacophony of robbers. And that's why he turned over their tables. And so what was his message? His message was, Gentiles will have all access in spite of you. And so all are invited in as adopted. Now this Monday was not a rainy day Monday. It was a great Monday for us as Gentiles, because this is the day when Jesus said, clear out, because I want the Gentiles to know all about God and about me. And that we're invited in as adopted children of the Father. And so this place of prayer is for Gentiles versus a den of thieves taking advantage of the people. And that's what, unfortunately, so many of our religious people do, even in this day and age, is they fill up everything so much that the cacophony drowns out our Lord and Savior and His sacrifice for us. Now on Tuesday, there were quite a few things that happened, but we're going to skip over to Matthew 24:30. You'll say, gosh, boy, we're skipping over 3 chapters practically of New Testament and this week's story? Well, you'll find when you read there that what Jesus is doing is, in every chapter, he's making a comparison between those who are following Christ and are following God and his rule, and those who are just pretending to follow God and his rule. And he gives all kinds of examples, stories about that. And so we come at the end of all those stories, we come to the point, Matthew 24:30. Matthew 24:30. At that time the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And on to 31, and he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of heaven to the other. And so Jesus ends all that comparison of God's people and God's judgment of the rebellious with these verses at the end. So he's basically saying the whole family of God will gather at the sound of the trump. And so those choosing life will attain it. Those choosing life will attain it. Those not choosing life, who are like all of these examples and all of these stories that I've just told in 3 chapters, will not attain life because they won't choose it. So these stories tell us that there's a God future secured for the faithful versus a godless future for the rebellious. Now, let's move on to Matthew 26, 7 through 10. That is Wednesday. Matthew 26, 7 through 10. Sometimes this is called a Silent Wednesday, but it really wasn't Silent Wednesday when you actually take time to read the Gospels. Jesus did not come in to Jerusalem, but we have some action that is the highlight of this day. Verse 7, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured out on his head as he was reclining at the table. Well, interesting. That's an odd kind of tradition, isn't it? Pouring alabaster oil on his head. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Aware of this, Jesus said to them, why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. Okay, so Jesus is saying, this is the right thing to do. Why was it the right thing to do? You know, most women in those days, their primary job was to become a wife and mother in that culture. And they loved that tradition. They looked forward to it. They were wired for it. And so they would begin at an early age. A daughter's mother would give her an alabaster jar or bottle. And she would start saving up her money, and as she got closer and closer to marriage, she would put expensive oil in that jar. And that jar was used in that dusty climate whenever the husband would come home and the wife would want to say, you are special to me. She would invite him into the bedroom and she would wash his feet and then put oil on his feet. He'd been out working all day. And they would enjoy one another's presence, and that oil would feel so good. And not only would it feel so good, it would tell the husband, I respect you. I've been waiting for you. I love you. And this is my offering for you, my husband. Well, this lady came along, and guess what? She poured the whole bottle over Jesus' head and his shoulders and began to massage it in as though he were her husband. And she was enacting something that was very precious. And Jesus says, don't you bother this woman. She is preparing me for my burial. As a matter of fact, if a husband died during that time before the wife, which many times did happen because they had such a hard life, the remaining oil in the alabaster jar was used on his body to prepare him for burial. That was the last official act before she became a full-fledged widow in the society. And so Jesus says, the poor you always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. I tell you the truth, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Guess what? We don't even know her name. You'd think we'd know her name. We don't need to know her name. We need to know her heart. And so we know her heart. And that's why she is in the Gospels and will always be. And so, what is Jesus saying with this? This woman who was from outside the inner circle, who didn't even have a name, who wasn't even given a name in the story because she was a stranger from without that community. She's the least and the lowest. The least and the lowest. And Jesus says, the least and the lowest will reign with me. Aren't you glad of that? Because you might not be totally the least and the lowest, but if you're like me, you were down there. He brings you up. And so, humble, focused worship is the model of a Christian. Humble, focused worship. Precious oil should be reserved for precious occasions. This was a very precious occasion, but we even have that opportunity as brothers and sisters in Christ to wash and oil the feet of others who are working in the Lord's vineyard. Now we come to Thursday that week. And of course other things happened. We even read the other things that had happened, the fig tree withering and that sort of thing that Jesus told. But we want to concentrate on the meaning, the highlight meaning of each day of the week. So Matthew 26, 26 through 30. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks and broke it, gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. The last official act before his sacrificial death with his disciples, his chosen family, was this. And it basically says, there's the new covenant that I'm proclaiming. I proclaimed it with my presence when I came into the city, and I'm proclaiming it to all of you who are my people now. And when it says, "This is my body," that Greek word there is the Greek word for substance. This is my substance. This is what I'm all about. Bread that nurtures, that grows, that is the basis of the meal of life. This is my substance to give you nutrition, to give you spiritual nurturing that is all you ever need. And notice he doesn't say right there, "This is my blood." He says, "This is the blood of the covenant." What covenant? The new covenant. The new covenant that is not over like the old covenant was. And so, this covenant choice he offered to every one of his disciples, all the people that would follow him. And they could take it or leave it. Judas left. He didn't take it. The others took it and so claimed the new covenant. And so we're to remember the choice. And that's what we're going to do today when we take the Lord's Supper. We're going to remember that the new covenant is a choice and that we have accepted that choice in memory of Jesus and of what was and is to come. Hebrews 8:10 tells us that there's this new covenant that has come and that we all can partake if we only will. And finally, on Friday, as we know, this is where the sacrifice actually happened. And so, Jesus tells us in 27, or the book tells us in 27:50. Matthew 27:50. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. And so Jesus cried out, and we're going to talk just a minute about what he cried out, and gave up his spirit. Notice how it's said there? Nobody took Jesus' spirit away from him. He gave it up because that's what he came for. And so that tells us merciful sacrifice is his heart. And so, also for my true people, the true people of God in Jesus Christ have a merciful, sacrificing heart. And that's what we aim for here. To say, the cross is the bridge that we've all crossed through unto life. And if you need life, come across the bridge that is that sacrificial heart of God. And so, today, we as a family commemorate that Last Supper because of the act that was going to happen the next day, and indeed did. And then next Sunday we celebrate. Next Sunday is all about celebration because that cross is empty. He's not on the cross. He was buried, and then he rose again after 3 days. So we're going to participate in a memory of him in just a few minutes. But I want to close out by remembering the cross and the pain and the suffering and why it was so important. But we read through this one more time before we leave the week. The old covenant is over, and so the king is present. Gentiles will have all access, and so all are invited in as adopted. The whole family will gather, God says, and so those choosing life attain it. The least and the lowest will reign. And so humble, focused worship should be our goal. The new covenant is a choice, and so remember the choice. Merciful sacrifice is my heart, God says, and so it will be also for my true people. But let's finish by saying we have proof that God was on that cross. In Jesus Christ, the Son of God, came and gave away his vision, his empathy as God, and took on the God-man body that was Jesus. And then he hung on the cross. And there are 7 scriptures we're going to go through really quickly. The Pharisees and the rulers that put him on that cross said, "See, he was a fake. all you people were saying he's the king, he's the ruler, he's coming in, he's going to do all these wonderful things. See, now he hangs on a cross and he can't get off. He was a fake. But you remember, as soon as Jesus gave up his spirit, even the Roman Gentile centurion said, surely he was the Son of God. Well, that didn't happen just because of an earthquake. That happened because of the 7 things the centurion heard Jesus say when he was on the cross. And so, only God would hang on a cross and say these things. Father, forgive them, for they know not they do not know what they're doing. Whoever had hung on a cross and said, forgive these people. Today you will be with me in paradise, was the second thing he said to the believing thief. Remember that part of the story? That was the second thing he said on the cross. Today you will be with me in paradise. And that is a great encouragement to all of us, that on the day of our death, we, as believers, will today be with Jesus in paradise. The third thing he said was, dear woman, here is your son. And then to John, he said, here is your mother. Why is that in there? What was Jesus doing? He was showing compassion, not for himself, but for his mother, his remaining parent, that for the rest of her life she would be taken care of, even though he was taken away from her. That he was making provision for her. See how everything is outgoing from Jesus. There's none of the incoming. There's only outgoing. And so then Jesus says, the fourth thing, my God, it was mine to be forsaken. That's how the Greek actually reads in the original manuscripts. It was mine to be forsaken. Not why have I been forsaken. There's no question mark there in the Greek. It was mine, my destiny to be forsaken. And then the fifth thing he said was, I am thirsty. Why would he say I'm thirsty? Because he was thirsty. All of the blood was leaving from his body. All of the perspiration was going. He didn't have enough saliva to say the most important thing that needed to be said from the cross. And they gave him something to just wet his mouth so he could say the most important thing from the cross, and that's this next thing. It is completed. Many of our Bibles say it is finished, and that's not wrong. But the intent of the Greek mood there is it is completed. And that's different from it is finished. Something can be finished and it's not your thing that you did. But Jesus says it is completed. It's my thing that I did, and it's completed. And the Greek word there is tetelestai. Tetelestai means it's completed, done. And then, finally, just before he dies, he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And so, Jesus says, my spirit's going to live on and on. And I'm just taking it from this body where it's been housed for the last 33 or so years, and I'm committing it back to the Father. It will live on and on. It will live on as God. Ours will live on as adopted children of God. And so, these 7 things in this order is what we gain from looking at Matthew, Luke, and John about the whole story that happened. And isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful that Jesus was always giving us from the cross something to encourage us, something to show us that he loved us. And when he said tetelestai, then all of us can look back at the Gospels and all he did and all the healing and all the stories and go, hey, it's all of that that is completed in Jesus Christ's sacrifice. So, next week, we will say, He is risen. He is risen indeed. And we will celebrate next week. No more will He be on the cross. No more will be in the tomb. No more will we be waiting, but it will be sunrise and He is risen. In the meantime, this week we do in remembrance of Him. And so I would like for us to go into a time now where we reverence the Father. And if you're a visitor here, please see me afterwards for any decision that you might make. And otherwise, we will go forward into our time of remembering the Lord and His sacrifice.